Welcome back to Screen View Mirror. I'm your host, Emma, and you're listening to Screen View Thoughts. Today on the podcast, I'm once again joined by Patrick from last week, and we'll be revisiting the topic of Kubrick and war. Hi, Patrick. Hope you're doing well.
I'm doing great. I'm glad to be back.
Thank you. All right. Well, if you haven't seen last week's podcast episode in which we spoke about Fear and Desire and Dr. Strangelove, feel free to check that out. The link is in the description, but on this episode, we'll be delving into Paths of Glory and Full Metal Jacket and the depressing drama stuff of the two films.
It's much less funny.
Yeah, it is. Well, it's not as absurd, and it really deals with the psychological and the physical damage that comes with war, and also there's the motif of sort of injustice and hierarchy. And definitely the us versus them attitude in relation to the hierarchy within that one side of war, and also in relation to the hierarchy of, not the hierarchy, sorry, but of the friend versus foe element of war. So, for example, with
definitely
Full Metal Jacket, you have like Private Pyle and the Sergeant, so that's an us versus them attitude, but technically they're on the same side, whereas you also have the U.S. and Vietnam, which has that kind of, the U.S. and communism, which has that us versus them attitude as well. So that's kind of what I'm referring to. But yeah, let's.
One thing I found interesting in like both of them is also the way you mentioned hierarchy, but I like the way that in both films hierarchy in war is like meant to sort of try to suppress any type of like psychological or emotional just existence, right? Like it very much is a repression based on hierarchy, which I thought was very, very powerful.
Yeah.
In both films.
Yeah, I agree. I think that from the four films, I'd say that Paths of Glory was the most successful in its anti-war message, but I mean, you can't deny the power of Full Metal Jacket. So, yeah. But anyway, going
Full
in.
Metal Jacket is...
Full Metal Jacket is one of the. I mean, between Apocalypse Now and Full Metal Jacket, which would you say is the greater Vietnam War movie?
I have a personal thing for Full Metal Jacket. It's like one of my favorite films. So I'm a Kubrick guy. I'm a Kubrick stan. You know, no matter what he does, I'm gonna. So yeah,
support him.
Like Full Metal Jacket and Come and See are like my two top films. They're very, very good. Very different vibes.
I haven't seen Come and See yet, but I know it's
it will break. It'll
very
break
harrowing.
Your heart.
Yeah, I know the acting is brilliant and it's just tragic, but our art is not
Everyone
always meant to
this,
please. So.
Quick break from Kubrick
Go watch Kubrick. So anyway. Yeah, to say I will go watch Come and See at some point. But so going back to Paths of Glory, another anti-war film. So that was shot in 1957, 58, and it's about World War I. It's a drama about World War I, and it tackles sort of the life of soldiers versus the life of generals. And I say versus because there's very much that contrast that Kubrick highlights. And apart from Kirk Douglas's character, apart from that officer, the generals kind of treat their soldiers with so much, I don't know, not necessarily contempt or disdain, but almost
it's like a sort of apathy. Like
an apathy, like a you're
the
so replaceable, you're so
care.
Disposable. Exactly, right? And so you notice this hierarchy between the officers and the soldiers, which prevents everyone from acting in everyone's best interest. So there's this kind of us versus them attitude between the high-ranking military officials and the low-ranking soldiers. And there are those clear class differences. You have the contrast of the tracking shot in the trenches that Kubrick does, beautiful shot.
Absolutely.
And that you have all of it was
really
almost
nice
like
shots.
A genuine shot from World War I or World War II footage. Well, World War I because it's really a trench, but you see everyone looking at that camera and you just see like the life drained from their faces. It's a heartbreaking movie, but and then you cut from the trenches to an opulent ballroom where everyone's having a fancy dinner and people are drinking champagne as if there's no war, right? So that contrast makes it all the more horrible because they're supposed to be on the same side, they're supposed to be helping each other out, but there's very much this complacency on behalf of a lot of the generals. And actually, because of that aspect of the film was banned in France for 20 years because they just decided that it was too kind of dishonorable to show to a generation that was very like a lot of the people that fought. Well, I don't know a lot, but I don't know if it's a lot of them, but some people that...
There are definitely some of them.
Yeah, exactly. Some World War I veterans were more likely to be alive in 1958 than in 1978, and yet the movie was banned for 20 years because it was like they said that it was disrespecting the generation that kind of protected France and fought in the war. And although that's understandable, it's a shame because in my opinion, art should never be censored. It's not designed to please. It's designed to create something, and not everything has to be good, right? So... powerful film, definitely. Well, what's your take on Paths of Glory?
Well, you mentioned briefly the idea of like how it's so the officers are so detached, right, from the people and don't really see them as humans. And there's one shot near the very beginning that's like one of my favorite shots in the film. I think it represents that very powerfully because the big meanie general, whose name escapes me at the moment, is like walking through near the very beginning, and it's like a one-er tracking shot watching him go through the trench, and he just speaks to like soldiers one at a time, and he's like, so you excited to kill some more Germans? You have a wife? How's your wife? Okay, cool. Walks on to the next one, same conversation. Walks on to the next one, same conversation. It's like, Jesus, these really are not people to you at all. It's just like it almost seems like he thinks he's doing them a favor by like coming to talk to them, And the second there's one guy who's like, oh, I'm not having a great day, he's like, wife? I don't got a wife. And he doesn't seem very excited about killing Germans. He's like, well, you know what, you can go away. I don't like you. So I thought that was a very powerful shot that even though it's right at the beginning, it pretty much encapsulates most of what the film is about, I find.
No, yeah, I agree. The details in the film, the details in the dialogue they're just incredible. So like the way the courtroom scene was shot was just beautiful.
Absolutely. Very nicely done.
Like as the soldiers kind of got more and more into their stories, the camera got physically closer and closer to the soldiers. So it started off with like a long, well, not a long shot, but at least like a full shot, and then it ended as a medium close up. Whereas the framing of not the soldiers, it was like the military tribunal people basically. So it was basically the general and a few other officers who were on the military tribunal. So the framing of those guys was static. So it didn't really matter whether they said anything or not. It was still kind of like more or less a medium shot that was filming them and that was framing them. Whereas with the soldiers, we were far away, but then we got closer to them as we grew into their shoes, basically.
We're definitely placed in the frame with those officials as like being much more powerful and like important. Whereas, absolutely, I noticed that too. That's it's a subtle little framing detail, but it's good. I like it.
Yeah. And, of course, the drums during the execution sequence, I mean, it made me anxious. The stress levels were up because it was just...
I think drums during the whole film are just amazing. But, like, specifically, like you're saying, during that execution scene, it kind of made my heart sink. Like, right as they, like, sort of wide shot from behind the guns, they fire, we see them fall, and the drums hit at the same time. My heart sank.
Yeah, it was... I don't know, it was a very painful moment, but, and then they cut straight to the lavish dining scene, where the general said, that
juxtaposition.
The juxtaposition of, like, the trenches and the, being stabbed, not in the back, but literally in the face, to, the men died wonderfully, officer.
Yeah.
The men died wonderfully. Oh, that was horrible.
The men died wonderfully.
Yeah, that's... terrible.
The men who we sentenced to death, they did a good job of dying. They were really skilled at it.
The film really reiterates that people are not machines, we're not war machines. For example, Kirk Douglas's character, he was the one that tried to save his men and be the most compassionate one. But, I think that the song at the end really confirms that there's some sort, even in the most sort of desperate times of history, there has to be some strand of humanity somewhere with someone, because what we see at the end of the film, well, it's not the closing sequence, but it's basically toward the end. The German girl, she's kind of basically caught by the French soldiers, and she's asked to sing to a group of men that are in a restaurant. And at first they shout, they're very loud, they don't let her sing, but as the more she starts singing, the more she sings, the more the men kind of quiet down and start listening. And when they really listen to her, this whole, boundary of Germans bad, French good, or French bad, Germans good kind of erases itself, and there's this kind of there's cultural understanding that's fostered between the French soldiers and the German singer, and the men start humming along and they start crying, and Kubrick does these beautiful sort of zoom in shots onto their faces.
Slow zooms into their faces,
slowing into their kind of reactions, and it made me think, well, you don't add a music shot to a war film. Not necessarily. You don't need it technically, right? There was no Sound of Music style sequence in Full Metal Jacket or Strangelove.
I mean, they're kind of singing as they walk away at the end of Full Metal Jacket. Like, it's not like a full singing scene, It's just
yes. But the purpose of that was different, I would say,
absolutely,
than the significance of this scene, because here we have the statement of that art and music and cinema or just anything creative can stir up the same emotions in two completely different people, even if they're supposed to be enemies, which actually takes us to
and erase that sort of us versus them boundary.
Us versus them boundary, and that takes us to the real life example of that kind of truce in history. So during World War I, not every Christmas, but a lot of the Christmases, on a lot of the most Christmases, it was a few years of war. But, there were instances of soldiers stopping the fighting on Christmas Day and playing football in no man's land. And, you had the Germans on one team.
Just having a good time.
Yeah, just having a good time. And you had the Germans on one team, the French on the other, and they decided to not kill each other for one day and to play football in this kind of bond, and this truce basically was called the Christmas truce football. Like that was a bit, I think that was reflected in the song toward the end of the film.
Definitely. And I like that interpretation a lot. I kind of read that scene a little bit differently. Like, to me, when I was seeing them all, like, howling, it wasn't so much like a, ew, German person, like, bad enemy. It was more like almost these people who probably haven't seen females in a while. Who are, like, sort of have this, like, intense... Because they're, like, surrounded by a bunch of dudes. They're, like, having this intense, like, almost aggressive sexual reaction,
Yeah.
Like, howling and, like, woo! And then once she starts to sing, it feels like that sort of pressure almost, like, dissipates.
Yeah, and then they start crying.
They're, like... They become, like, one with, like, the beauty of humanity and, as you're saying, art. So I think maybe both those things are sort of coexisting. The idea of the masculine, like, aggressive thing, especially in a war setting, but then also the boundary of us versus them and, like, the enemy, but kind of both of those things falling at the same time.
Yeah, it's a powerful movie, and in case you don't have anything else to add, let's go on to Full Metal Jacket. So
I'm excited. I love Full Metal
traveling
Jacket.
all the way to 1987.
Big gap.
Back to the future past. I tried to make that joke.
I'm proud of you.
Thank you. That bringing in a super commercial movie into
bringing into a big summer blockbuster into our
art house, sort of a intellectual debate on this.
We're like, war and existentialism. Also, car go vroom and go back in time.
Also, Marty McFly. You made a time machine out of a DeLorean?
Good God.
88.8 miles per hour.
Wait, did they actually... They didn't come out the same year, did they? Full Metal Jacket and Back to the Future?
Wait, no, I think the second or the third Back to the Future came out in 87.
Oh, 85.
But yeah, no, the The first one was 85.
Close enough.
Anyway, they weren't. I
The
didn't
second
really
was
like.
89, so they're close enough.
Oh right. Well. Anyway, let's talk about Full Metal Jacket now. 1987. It's another drama.
Can I say
about the
something
Vietnam.
before we
go
speak
ahead.
about Full Metal Jacket for a second? Because every time I see people talking about Full Metal Jacket, it seems to be that everyone loves the first half.
Oh yes.
And thinks the second half kind of sucks. And I'm gonna say, if you think that, stop. please rewatch this movie.
Be nice.
Because it fundamentally I'm messing, but like it fundamentally doesn't work without that second half. The second half is even better. Like the first half is hilarious, obviously. It's just the general going around being an asshole.
Right.
But the second half is so heartbreaking. Like they don't work without each other. So stop being mean to the second half of Full Metal Jacket, please.
No, but
that is my PSA.
You know, I got that a lot. Like, I talked to a bunch of people who've seen the movie, and they told me, yeah, the first half was great, but then did Kubrick get lazy in the second half? And I'm like, no. I'm pretty sure he knew what he was doing. And
No,
look, here's the thing. It's very realistic, because what he's doing is he's comparing the sort of frame of mind of the guys that would go on to Vietnam and fight before the actual war, so during the training.
Absolutely.
And he's got that, 45-minute montage, basically, of their few months of training, and then they go off onto the war side of the equation. And that feels mundane. It feels, empty, full of destruction, damage. They don't know what they're doing there. They don't get the war. They just don't want to be there. It's boring. And it wasn't as fun as the training where they were all basically very eager to prove themselves. But the way the movie's frames their frame of mind. If you get what I'm, the way the movie is frames the frame of mind that they had.
I get what you mean.
Look,
now.
because it's like, if you
Absolutely.
take that separator of not being in the war versus eventually getting to the war. A lot of people must have been excited to go fight. Well, I don't know about that, but they must have been curious. If not excited, okay, probably not. There were a lot of protests and stuff, but they must have been at least curious, right, about how it would go down and what would happen. But then they get to Vietnam and they feel like, oh, well, this is boring and we can't even escape. And this is horrible, and this is giving us PTSD. And that's literally how you feel when you watch the movie, because the second half, you can't escape it. It's basically just a bunch of people killing each other. It's basically Vietnam.
Absolutely.
But then the first part has the cool music, and it's got the...
This is my rifle, this is my gun. All that fun stuff.
Yeah, basically. Yes. So I think that mirrors the frame of mind of a lot of the soldiers at the time. And that's why I think it's significant. I mean, this is Kubrick we're talking about. I highly doubt that he chose that.
And let's not forget,
he knows how to make an interesting movie.
For sure.
By 1987 at least.
Exactly, that's what I'm saying. This is 87 Kubrick. Like, this is no slouch. This is no...
Right, this is no Fear and Desire. So, so that's that. But I love also the opening sequence, because we've got the song of Goodbye America, Hello Vietnam, and their disillusioned faces, and the hair being symbolically...
shaved
cut,
off,
and it's shaved off, like you're shaving your past off and you're shaving your humanity off, and now you have to be this sort of bare
this
animal.
bare, empty canvas to learn to just kill and nothing else. Like Joker's helmet,
exactly.
right? Born to kill.
Born to kill, and then with the irony of the peace sign.
The peace sign next to it.
Or even Animal's helmet with the I am become death, which is Oppenheimer's. Yeah, which is Oppenheimer's kind of what he said when commenting on the bomb. So it's this kind of dichotomy between, well, what are we fighting for, but also why are we fighting? And well, that's technically the same thing, but what are we fighting for and why we're fighting versus why are we? You know what I mean? Like, why are we here? Why is this happening?
Absolutely.
Why? It's really the fundamental kind of overarching why, which takes us back to the existentialism, the absurdism of fear and desire, and all that stuff.
And I'm glad you mentioned that, because there's one of my favorite lines in the film, and maybe in any film. It's so funny. There's a part in Full Metal Jacket where they're in Vietnam, and someone's like, I don't remember who it is. Someone's doing like a documentary thing, like filming all of them, getting their thoughts on the war, and There's the one guy, I don't remember his name, but he's standing, like the dumb one, you know, the like big tough dumb one. And he's standing there with his giant gun over his shoulder and he goes, "What do I think about the war? Well, I think we should win." Like, this man has like no idea why he's here. He has no idea what he's doing. He's just like, well, exactly. I guess we could win. That could be cool.
No, I completely agree. And that film, that sort of interview film sequence really shows us the cluelessness of these young boys.
They got like no idea what's going on.
They have no idea what's going on. They're either kind of conditioned to believe, right, well, you're here to free the free Vietnam from Vietnam?
Yeah.
Or free Vietnam from communism. Actually, in the training sequence, you get Sergeant. What's his name? What's his name? Sergeant.
I have it right here. General Sergeant
Hartman, right? And he says, Chaplain Charlie will tell you how the U.S. will beat the forces of communism. Now, he's referring to like a religious chaplain, but Chaplain Charlie Chaplin,
yeah.
The Cold War is not the Cold War, the Vietnam War is comical. I mean, that's in 1987, Reaganomics and the Reagan era and the Cold War is still happening, and you have...
It's controversial, but it's powerful for sure.
It's controversial, but I mean, props to Kubrick for making that kind of a statement.
Yeah, for sure.
But yeah, you can barely hear it. He says, like, Chaplain Charlie will tell you how the U.S. will beat the forces of communism. And it's just, again, the irony that's brought into the film. So,
also,
yeah.
I don't want us to skip over Private Pile because, God.
Oh, yes, let's not. Let's talk. What, can I say something? Can I say
please.
That I think that Private Pile really ties this whole discussion of Kubrick and War together.
100% agree.
Because he's literally, like, everything that is said in Full Metal Jacket, everything that's said in Strangelove, in Paths of Glory, and in Fear and Desire applies to Private Pile.
It's very much like all comes together in like a final thesis almost in Private Pile.
Yeah, it all comes together because, you know, it goes back to Fear and Desire with the idea of the war of the self, right? Because Pyle was, quote unquote, like incompetent with the war stuff, and so the sergeant went really hard on him, and he kind of
that sort of hierarchy, right? The power that's like
the hierarchy that takes us back
like
to
Paths of Glory,
right? Paths of Glory, exactly. And then when he heard that Oswald and Whitman trained at the Marines, he decided, okay, I'm going to kill my selfhood, like what they did with the generals in Fear and Desire.
Yeah.
And, well, this is slightly far-fetched, but, you know, let's roll with it. Let's go
I vibe with it. It's good. It's good.
Yeah. So he decided to kind of kill his selfhood. And I think, honestly, Pyle died the day that he found out about Oswald and Whitman. Mm-hmm. And from there on out, it wasn't Pyle. It was just this drive of animalistic kind of vengeance. So we can even bring Hamlet into this. Let's
my God.
Go all out with the references. But, no, yeah. And so it's...
hell yeah.
The vengeance that he got, and then he killed himself. But there were cases of suicide in the training of a lot of the soldiers in the era, and I mean, it's...
You know what? That just made me think what you said. I would love... This would ruin the film, but I would just love if when Private Pyle is in the bathroom and he stands up, he just starts reciting to whether 'tis nobler in the mind to... just starts going full Hamlet. That would ruin the film. It would be very funny.
That would ruin the film. I think that would make it... It would make it as highbrow as Fear and Desire, if not more.
Yeah.
Because then it was, you know, Kubrick saying, "Oh, I'm a fish." But
exactly.
Then Private Pyle quoting Hamlet would have been a bit
Private Pyle just literally standing there going, "The slings and arrows of outrageous fortune, or take arms against a sea of troubles," and everyone's like, "Wait, hang on." Yeah,
but there's well, speaking of Shakespeare and plays, there's this parallel and history. There's this parallel between Private Pyle and Julius Caesar.
Yes,
I
definitely.
went there.
That was
because it's like
hell of a transition. You should be proud of yourself.
Thank you. But yeah, you know, Caesar, his closest friends beat him up. Well, stabbed him. But then, you know, with Private Pyle, Joker beating him up with the soap. So there's this parallel, and that is all I had to say. I had to make that parallel.
100%. I mean, also, just quickly, Vincent D'Onofrio is just amazing as Pyle also. Like, the sort of distant face, slowly descending into madness, the whole, like, during that whole sequence is fantastic.
Oh yeah, he was very much like Willard in Apocalypse Now. Speaking of Apocalypse Now, he's very much like that.
True.
And
we're really making connections all over the place, huh?
yeah. Well, I'm trying.
I'm impressed.
Trying.
I'm impressed.
It's all about screen, view, mirror.
Yeah, that's what's.
And you reflect it, and you reflect it onto others, right? That's the
Yeah.
I think we've reached the pinnacle of this channel. This is the golden age with Patrick on the show and talking about reflecting cinema.
We've reached
exactly
the magnum opus of screen view mirror.
Yeah, go ahead, tell me.
I don't want to jump away from Full Metal Jacket too much, but there's like one thing that I noticed about all four of these films and like the sort of the way we've separated them, right? The absurdism last week that we were talking about with Fear and Desire, Doctor Strangelove, and then the more like grounded Full Metal Jacket and Paths of Glory. I can't help, just because I base a lot of my own filmmaking stuff off of Kubrick's style. I couldn't help but notice the like contrasting visual styles and cinematography with the two pairs of films. If you look at Doctor Strangelove, you have all these like over the top whip zooms into like buttons and gizmos, and like it all feels very dramatic and exaggerated.
Yeah.
And similarly in Fear and Desire, like especially during that scene where he's stabbing the general or whatever, or stabbing the soldiers in the cabin, there's like all these quick cuts and grabbing the bread and close-ups, and it's all again very exaggerated. Then you turn to Paths of Glory and Full Metal Jacket, and I feel like it's these big harrowing tracking shots, and these we have much more distanced from the characters,
Oh, I agree.
So I feel like he's like subtly sort of reinforcing the different tones within those two pairs of films. But it might be reaching just because I'm a big Kubrick simp, but
No, but I agree, because it also shows how you can take a common theme or a concept, and just based off of the a different kind of stylistic choice or an overall change in tone and form, you can transform the meaning of that concept. Because we're talking
Definitely.
about Kubrick and war, but those are, and it's more or less the same theme, but the stylistic choices that he made and the tone of each film makes it. The stylistic choice that he made and the tone of the film makes it such that it just, it changes meaning. And it may not change its fundamental meaning, but the messages change and the way they're delivered change. And delivery is important in any creative pursuit. So, yeah.
It becomes four films with very different, like, approaches to essentially
the same idea.
I would argue the same meaning.
Exactly,
for sure.
exactly. So, it's the approach that...
Which seems to be, at least to me, that war is a humaneless institution that just forces people into violence, and that existentialism within war just becomes this nightmare of what am I doing and why,
Yeah, and the allusion to all the negative consequences of war. I mean, aside from obviously the dying, you have, for example...
Yeah, that's a pretty big one.
Yeah, but aside from that hiccup, there's, things like wartime propaganda and censorship. So when Private Joker is working for the Stars and Stripes, the kind of officer that's overseeing the journalism that's going on in Vietnam, he's saying... he told Joker not to say search and destroy, but instead of saying search and destroy, because we're not destroying, we're helping.
We're not destroying.
Instead of saying search and destroy, he asked him to say sweep and clear. Because it's, spring cleaning. Because it's spring cleaning. So we're sweeping and we're clearing. We're not searching or destroying. And it's that kind of...
Absolutely.
Right. And it's those details that Kubrick manages to bring into these films just really... I don't know. It makes them all the more telling and punctual in their messages.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
And I think that example speaks again to, like, war is like an institution, military is an institution, a system that like fundamentally rids people of humanity, because we're not killing people, we're just cleaning, because these aren't people, these are just like things in the way. We should move them out of the way, clean them up.
Yeah, and it's just going back to this whole hypocrisy that comes with war. And Private Joker wearing a peace sign, but then he's got "Born to Kill" written on his helmet, and
he says he doesn't want to kill women and children.
Yeah, and then he says he doesn't want to kill women and children.
Yeah.
but then he ends up shooting the girl at the end of the film, going back to the sort of absurdity and what is meaning and what is right and wrong and what is morality that we have in Fear and Desire. But even more so, for example, when one of the generals asks Joker, well, why do you get rid of that peace sign? Whose side are you on? Are you a commie or are you an American?
Are you a commie?
And so Joker kind of explains, well, I'm just wearing this badge because I want to talk about I want to reflect the duality of man. And then the general says, duality of what? Duality of man, the Jungian thing, sir.
I love that he literally says out loud duality of man.
Yeah, and so he says, I want to reflect the duality
The more you keep connecting it to the other ones, the more I feel like Full Metal Jacket, like we said it about Private Pile, I think Full Metal Jacket more broadly is like the cumulative thesis of all his like war themes that he was discussing in all of those films.
Yeah. No, I agree. But even what Joker said about the duality of man, the Jungian thing, when I watched
duality of man.
I watched Kubrick interview, and so he explained how, like, if anyone actually believed Joker, that's all, BS, and that it's just not true what he said, and that he had no idea what he was saying, and he wasn't designed to be able to think for himself, because he's supposed to be kind of working on behalf of this institution that's not necessarily controlled by him, right? So he's not supposed to be able to think for himself. So this kind of peace sign, he doesn't really know why he has it there. He doesn't know whether he's trying to reflect the Jungian thing or whether he's trying to rebel or whatever. He just has it there because it's the absurd, right?
Yeah.
It goes all. Maybe Fear and Desire is the best film of
Maybe, who knows?
But maybe I'm just an existentialist. I don't know.
I think what we're trying to get at here. It's pretty deep, so hang in there, people. But I think what we're trying to get at is war equals bad. I think that's...
Yeah, and I think that's all we have to say for Full Metal Jacket. What's the significance of how do you interpret the Mickey Mouse ending?
I have wrestled with that question every time I've watched this. And I think I find it just like a Mickey Mouse is very much a child's form of entertainment, right? So it's not unlike the final like art sort of message from Paths of Glory, but there's an underlying degree of like childhood innocence to it too, I find. So it's like they're singing to try and use art like we see in Paths of Glory to like, I guess, soothe themselves and rid themselves of like the horror of what they just did, but also to maybe sort of return to like a childlike innocence where they don't have to worry about responsibility and consequence for having done something so horrible by shooting a child,
No, yeah, I agree. And it's also maybe alluding to the fact that, in many ways, they're still children. They're still very young, and they still have their lives those of them. The ones who survived. The ones who survived, they still had, their lives in front of them, but then they were sort of stained by war. And that's horrible. And I think like people of our age who, well, most of us, I think it's safe to say that we haven't experienced war firsthand. Of course, depending on where we live, et cetera. But then, a lot of us have not seen war. And if you think about it, technically the 20th century, most of it was war. If you ask a veteran like, oh, so which war did you fight in? You have the option of Vietnam, Korea, World War II, a lot of options, which is, it's a shame that there's been so much death.
So many of them, yeah.
But yeah, that's Kubrick and war. But at least, if there's a positive side to war, I guess, if I can say that, it's that it led to a lot of beautiful art and to a lot of honest art.
It made some great films, that's for sure.
And it made some great films and great paintings and great poems.
It gave Kubrick a reason to make 4 banger movies.
Yeah, exactly. The first one being sort of probably based on his own existential crisis about not living up to Eisenstein, but,
One way or another.
One way or another. In many ways, I think he surpassed Eisenstein, because there's that thing where Eisenstein's film kind of had to be approved by Stalin, so there's that censorship fact, but, aside...
Maybe I'm tripping here, but I just noticed, because I'm on the IMDb page for Full Metal Jacket, I just noticed on the poster, right? full has 4 letters, metal has 5, and jacket has 6. So the title almost looks like a pyramid. And I'm wondering if that's
a
purposely
hierarchical
structured
thing
that way to look at hierarchy and power within the military institution, or if I'm just
I think that's good. No, I
overanalyzing the
think
smallest
this
details.
is. Look, I think. I mean, because the title comes from something that already existed without the idea of the movie being in place, you might be overanalyzing. But hey,
I'm
it's
definitely,
possible.
I'm willing to.
No. But overanalysis is always fun. Am I right? It's all about screen, view, mirror, right? But I'm sorry, I have to bring my channel in. I'm a YouTuber now. It's this if self promo. If I don't do it, who will?
You gotta plug it, or else. Yeah.
Exactly. But yeah, I think that's pretty much all we have time for today. Thanks for listening.
Yeah, we definitely
part
went
2.
too long. Whoops.
Yeah, sorry about that, but we had a lot of fun.
Hopefully, it was
in this
a fun
discussion.
time for everybody.
Hopefully, yeah, mutually. But yeah, thanks for listening. If you made it all the way to the end, and thank you, Patrick, once again for coming on the show this week. And yeah, we will meet again, just like last time. Hopefully someday, and
hopefully someday.
Talk about 2001 versus Solaris. I don't know. There's an idea. I threw it out there.
God, that would be dope.
That would be cool. That would be awesome. Awesome. Okay, well, next video topic, next podcast topic is already decided on. That's great. Okay.
Beautiful.
But in the meantime, keep watching movies, keep reflecting on cinema, and reflecting cinema to others. Thanks for listening. This was Screen View Thoughts.